I have been asked to talk of someone I think of as a Black History Month pioneer. In my research, one person stands out, and that is Tadoutchi. Tadoutchi's story stands out not only because of her courage, but also because of how unlikely it was that she would succeed as she did against all odds. Her actions, and those of many others like her, whose stories remain unknown to us, did change history. Tadoutchi was a young woman of slave status, born in the rural hinterland of the Tawa region of what today is the Republic of Niger in the first decade of the 20th century. We do not know how she was originally enslaved. She could have been born to a slave mother. But she grew up in a multi-ethnic and highly stratified society at the southern edge of the Sahara, an area where few patches of farming land are interspersed between rocky crevasses and sandy dunes. At the bottom layer of this multilingual society was a large stratum of enslaved persons, whose work made a vital contribution to the local economy and society. Tadoutchi is not a famous historical figure, but she did something exceptional. She rebelled against the systematic exploitation that she and others like her had been exposed to at the hands of members of the slave-owning class. The man she described as her master, a man called Barao, sold Tadoutchi's younger brother Idi into the trans-Saharan trade, and Tadoutchi refused to accept this. She would have looked like one of the women in this photo, maybe the woman standing or the one crouching. In June 1930, Tadoutchi, who was about 23 years of age and had a young baby, filed a complaint with Tawa's French colonial administration in which she accused her master Barao of having sold her 14-year-old brother Idi as well as another young boy. When Barao found out what Tadoutchi had done in retaliation, he sold her and her child into the trans-Saharan trade. She was already deep into the desert when her destiny changed unexpectedly. Under normal circumstances, Barao's revenge against Tadoutchi would have been easy to accomplish. But this time, international, national, and local dynamics took a different turn. In the early 20s, colonial empires came under unprecedented pressure by the League of Nations to enforce their anti-slavery legislation. In Tawa, the district officer, Adélard de Lopinot, took his role seriously. De Lopinot officially pursued Tadoutchi's case relentlessly. The chief of Tamaské, Tubadan Aga, had private scores to settle with Barao. He testified against Barao, incriminating him. Tuba then sent his men to find the slave traders who had sold and resold Tadoutchi and Idi further and further into the desert. And they found them. Retrieved from these trafficking networks, Tadoutchi and Idi returned to Tawa to testify against Barao. Tadoutchi's testimony reveals what happened after Barao had sold her into the trans-Saharan slave trade. And I'm going to quote her own words in my own English translation. Barao went back the way he had come, and the nomads who were already in possession of my brother Idi left with Idi myself and my child that I was carrying on my back. We traveled by camel for about 9 days, traveling overnight from sunset until about midday every day. On the 9th day, we reached the nomads' camp. We spent 1 week there. Then we traveled 5 days westwards and reached a valley where there were the camps of some Arabs with their tents and their camels. The nomads who had brought us there sold us to these Arabs, I for 6 camels and my younger brother for 5. The nomad who had given the rifle and pled to Barao kept my child. I stayed at the camp of the Arabs where we had been sold. But my brother Idi was taken away by the Arab who had bought him to another camp located south of the first camp. A few days later, the nomads who had sold us came back to look for us at the Arabs' camp. Their chief had received a paper that stated that Barao had been imprisoned and that a search had been launched for me. He asked us whether we would be able to return to Tamaské or Tawa on our own. We said we would, and he let us go without giving us any food or water. It took us 20 days in total to come from Musa's camp to here. During almost the entire journey, we ate leaves and drank water from the ponds scattered along the way. End of quote. On 22 August 1930, Tadoutchi, Idi, and other testimonies were brought to the administration headquarters and again interrogated. Until then, Barao had always denied having sold anyone. He argued this was a plot of the chief Tuba against him. And that day, the administrator asked Barao, "Do you insist denying that you sold Tadoutchi, her son, and her brother Idi?" Barao replied, "I never sold anyone." The administrator then turned to Tadoutchi. "Is this the man who sold you?" She replied, "It is him." Then the administrator turned to Idi. "Do you recognize this man? Is he the man who sold you?" Idi replied, "Yes, it is he. He says nothing but lies." This is a long and complex case. In the end, Barao and all those who had been involved in the slave trade were condemned. Tadoutchi and Idi gained their freedom, but as far as we know, Tadoutchi's baby remained lost in the Sahara. There can be no doubt that Tadoutchi knew the dangers she exposed herself to when she denounced Barao for selling Idi after he had already sold another one of her brothers. Yet she did not hesitate to take a stance against Idi's enslavement and sale. She denounced Barao, and she could have lost everything. But she chose to denounce those who had enslaved her and sold her brother. At a great cost to herself, her acts of resistance undermined slavery.